Welcome to the next video of Chapter 5. So far, we've looked at solving quadratic equations. We've solved by factoring, and we've solved by the square root method. Square root method is pretty convenient, but it only works when the quadratic equation is in a certain form. So what we're going to do today is we're going to learn a process called completing the square. Completing the square will help us take any quadratic and put it in a form so that we can use the square root method. Before we learn completing the square, though, I want to review the square root method. So let's look at that first problem, x squared equals 48. First step, anytime you're using the square root method, make sure you can use the square root method. So in this case, we have an x squared and no x term, so we're good to go. X squared is alone, which means we can take a square root. So we get x equals, remember, anytime you're taking a square root, you get plus or minus. And then we got to break down that 48. So we've talked about there's two methods, either looking for the pairs or looking for a perfect square. I know that 16 goes into 48 and 16 is a perfect square, so I get 4 root 3. So my answer is x equals plus or minus 4 root 3. Again, don't forget the plus or minus. Equation to the right is a little bit more complicated. So we can still use the square root method because we have a squared term and no singular or linear term. So we need to get that squared part alone. I'm going to subtract 5. So I get x minus 3 squared equals 81. At this point, we can take the square root. So we get x minus 3 equals plus or minus 9. Don't forget the plus or minus. Moving 3 over, I get x equals 3 plus or minus 9. I gotta ask myself, are these like terms? Yes, they are. 3 plus 9 will give me 12. 3 minus 9 will give me negative 6. Now, how do I know I should get two answers? Because of the squared. So whatever your highest exponent is, tells us that we're gonna get two answers, or get that many answers. Okay, so now that we've reviewed the square root method, let's take a look at problem number 1. It says solve using the square root method. Okay, so first thing I want us to notice, we can't solve this right now using the square root method. We have an x squared, we also have a singular x term, so we have a linear x term. That's an issue. So we need to put this equation in a form where we can use the square root method. Here's what you're going to do. Any constant you have, you're going to move to the other side. So in this case, we have x squared minus 10x. Leave yourself a space, and I'll tell you why in a minute. And then if we subtract that 25, 27 minus 25 will give us 2. Okay, so ultimately what we're looking to do is we're looking to put this side, put that left side in a form where we have x plus or minus something squared. So that's our ultimate goal. We got to figure out how to do that though. So we're going to need to add something to that spot that we drew. Here's what you're going to do. That number that's in the middle, you're going to take it, divide it by 2, and square it. So negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Negative 5 squared is 25. Now, can we just add any number we want to any side of the equation? No, of course not. We need to keep this equation balanced. So if we add 25 to the left side, got to add it to the right side also. So that right side is going to get us back to 27. Left side is going to factor. So two numbers that multiply to 25 and add to negative 10, it's negative 5 and negative 5. So that's x minus 5 squared. We are now at a point where we can use the square root method. So I'm going to take the square root. I get x minus 5 equals, don't forget the plus or minus. Square root of 27 we need to break down. So 27 is 9 times 3. If I want to, I can do the pairs method. So I get 3 root 3. Adding 5, I get x equals 5 plus or minus 3 root 3. Those are not like terms, so we cannot add them. Okay, so I know this is new for us. We're going to do another example together. So try to stick with me on this next example. Example 2, again it says solve using the square root method. Again, we can't do that right off the bat. We have an x squared, we also have an x term. So we're going to need to complete the square to put this equation in a form where we can use the square root method. I want to have you take note of this box. You have to have a lead coefficient of 1 in order to complete the square. So that 2 right now is an issue, the 2 in front of the x squared. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to divide that 2 out. So I get x squared plus 16x minus 9 equals 0. Now that I have a 1x squared, I'm ready to complete the square. I'm going to start like I did before by adding that constant to the other side. I told you to remember to leave yourself a space. That's what we're going to be adding so that we can have something squared, a binomial squared. So again, what we're going to do is take that number in the middle, divide it by 2, and square it. So 16 divided by 2 is 8. 8 squared is 64. So I'm going to add 64 to both sides. On the right side, 9 add 64 is going to give me 73. The left side should factor now. Two numbers that multiply to 64 but add to 8. So product sum, it's going to be 8 and 8. So we get x plus 8 squared. Now I'm ready to use the square root method. So I can take the square root, get x plus 8 equals plus or minus root 73. Again, don't forget the plus or minus. Moving 8 over, I get negative 8 plus or minus root 73. Again, make sure you have the right number of solutions. X squared means we're going to have 2 solutions. Okay, that's the basic idea of completing the square. So let's jump to the next page of notes. At the top, you have a problem that you will be doing. So this is the problem that I want you to do. When you turn in your notes, I'm going to make sure that you have that problem completed. This is the end of the required part of the video. If you would like an extra example, I'm going to go through one more. But again, this is optional. The you try it problem at the top, though, does need to be done. So make sure you do that problem at the top before you turn your notes in. For those who want the extra example, we're going to go through it now. Okay, so we have x squared x. We can't use the square root method yet. So I'm going to start by moving that 6 to the other side. I like to leave myself spaces on both sides since I know I'm going to add something to both sides. Take that middle term, divide it by 2, and square it. So we get negative 4 squared is 16. That's what we'll add to both sides. The right side we end up with 10. The left side, looking for 2 numbers that multiply to 16 and add to negative 8. It's negative 4 and negative 4. So we get x minus 4 squared. At this point, I'm ready to take a square root. So I get x minus 4 equals plus or minus root 10. Lastly, add that 4 over, and we get 4 plus or minus root 10. So I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please make sure you write them down or you email me.